Welcome to this video for teachers who aspire to become middle leaders or senior leaders. I'm going to show you how you can accelerate your teaching career and how you can navigate through the selection processes for job interviews. My name's Paul. I'm an executive head teacher and I'm going to give you an insight into what head teachers are looking for when we are recruiting and going through the selection processes for jobs involving middle leaders and senior leaders positions. Now, there is a lot of competition for senior leadership positions and middle leadership positions. So you need to make sure that your job application really stands out. It does take a lot of time to create a really strong application, and if you're not getting invited to interview, then you're going to find that very frustrating. And if this keeps happening job application after job application, you're going to get demotivated and you might lose confidence. So, what if you knew how to get your application through the sifting process and invited to interview every time you applied for a job? And what if you knew the tricks to excel at the interview tasks and get those job offers? Imagine how you, your family and your friends are going to feel when you get promoted. And if you get promoted 2 or 3 times in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to at least double your salary. And that means over the next 10 to 20 years, you could earn an extra £400,000 to £800,000. And because our pensions rely on the average salaries throughout your teaching career, you're going to retire with a much better pension. Now, this will happen to people who understand the recruitment system and understand how to navigate through the selection processes for leadership positions. In the rest of this video, I'm going to show you a 5-step process you can use to develop your career, and it will show you how to be successful at job interviews. You can use these 5 steps to work towards and achieve your next promotion, but they are a recipe for success. So you'll be able to use them to achieve future promotions much more quickly. Head teachers use fairly common recruitment methods. So I'll show you how they approach the selection process. I'll explain how they sift through job applications and decide who to invite for interview. I'll discuss the type of tasks they'll ask you to do on interview and describe and explain what they are looking for when you are doing these tasks. And towards the end, we'll look at how they decide who to offer the job to. Now, being able to put these 5 steps into action could be the difference between you applying for job after job after job without being successful and being offered a dream job. So let's take a look at the 5 steps. First, you must take a strategic approach to your job hunting. So in step 1, we'll look at what is involved in doing this. In step 2, we'll look at how to boost your CV and make sure it contains all of the key information a head teacher is looking for. It does take quite a considerable amount of time to put a strong application together, and you must make sure you are applying for the right jobs that have a high degree of success. So in step 3, we'll look at how you can choose the right jobs for you to apply for. In step 4, we'll look at how you can put applications in that get you interviews every time you submit one. And in step 5, we'll look at the interview tasks and discuss what the head teacher is looking for in each of these. What do I mean by having a strategic approach to your job hunting? Well, the problem is that most people wait until they see their ideal job being advertised until they start to prepare for it. And because schools only give a sort of 2-week gap between advertising the job and the deadline, then it makes it very difficult to put a strong application in unless you've started preparing well in advance. If you do get invited to interview, the school will normally send you the information 3 or 4 days in advance of the type of tasks they want you to do. And that's very little time for you to get prepared to do these tasks really well. So being strategic means you have to start preparing to put in applications and to be really good at the interview tasks well in advance of these jobs being advertised. If you can implement all of the 5 steps effectively, then you're going to achieve your dream job. So watch the video all the way through. There are great tips for each of the 5 steps throughout it, and at the end I'll show you how you can get started to implement this program. To really boost your CV, you need to prepare well-drafted paragraphs of the key information a head teacher is looking for. Preparing these in advance of the job being advertised means that you'll be able to put this information straight into an application and modify it to suit that job as soon as you see that job advertised. And this means you'll be able to put in a really strong application that will convince a head teacher to invite you for interview. Let's have a look at the type of information you need to put in your application. And the first thing a head teacher is looking for is evidence that you are a really good teacher. So simply saying that is not going to be enough. You've got to support this with some kind of assessment data. And this needs to show that your students make excellent progress. If you teach exam classes like Year 11 or Year 13, then the head would expect you to use data from the exam boards. If you teach Year 5, they would expect you to use the assessment data from Year 5. Otherwise, you're going to be using internal assessment data. So you'll need to use that data effectively to convince the head teacher that your students make excellent progress. And if you're not 100% certain how to do that, talk to the person who organises and manages all the data in your school and make sure you pick out evidence that is clearly going to show your students make excellent progress. You need a paragraph of information that shows you can lead teams to achieve excellent student progress beyond the context of your own classroom teaching. So let's have a look at how you can present this information. First, describe the team and say what they are responsible for. Next, quote some assessment data that shows this group of students makes excellent progress. Now you can go on to explain how you lead the team. Describe your leadership approaches, describe your leadership styles, describe how you get buy-in from staff who might otherwise be resistant or reluctant. Describe how you hold them accountable and how do you motivate them and how do you support them when things get difficult. This could also be an opportunity to add some information about your views on instructional leadership and change management. If you do this effectively, that will really impress a head teacher. But don't forget, when you are writing this paragraph of information, always make sure it relates to the impact on student progress. As a head, I'll want to know what professional development you've undertaken that has developed your leadership skills. So it's really important to put together a strong paragraph that describes the type of training you've had, but also explains how you've put this training into practice and the impact this has had on teachers and students. How do you identify the right jobs to apply for? This is really important because you need to invest your time, effort and energy in jobs that you have a high degree of being successful in when you submit applications. You're probably going to use the TES website to identify the jobs that you're interested in. Once you've done that, download the essential criteria and desirable criteria that the schools produce for each of the jobs. Go through the essential criteria carefully. If you don't meet all of this criteria, you're not going to be invited to interview. Once you've found jobs that you do meet the essential criteria, go through the desirable criteria carefully. Now, the more of this criteria that you meet, the stronger your application is going to be. And once you've done this for all of the jobs, you'll then be able to rank them in order of how successful you're going to be. The ones where you meet more of the criteria than the others, you've got a higher degree of being successful. And now you can focus your time and energy in putting together a strong application for these jobs. So, what do you need to do to put together a really strong application? Now you've got to go back to those pre-prepared paragraphs of information and relate them to the essential and desirable criteria. Write lots of small paragraphs that show you meet all of the essential criteria, and then add in the ones that meet the desirable criteria. Once you've got all the information in one document, you can then start to reshape it and restructure it. So you'll probably group 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 of these sets of criteria together so that you haven't got 30, 40 different short paragraphs. Then put them in some kind of order that flows really well, and the ones that are really meaty big ones that you think are important, make sure they go at the front. The first paragraph's also really important, and what you want to do in this paragraph is convince the head teacher that this really is an ideal job for you. So make a reference to having looked at all of the information from the school and the school website and say that at this stage in your career, you feel this is an ideal job for you. And mention 1 or 2 things that make you think that. The rest of your application is going to convince a head teacher that this really is an ideal job for you. And then, of course, you should get invited to interview. Putting together a really strong statement is going to take a few drafts. Now, it's important after each of these drafts you get really good feedback. So give your application along with the essential and desirable criteria to a senior leader who is involved in sifting through applications. And ask them if they think you meet all of the essential criteria and how much of the desirable criteria you also meet. That will give you a good indication of how strong your application is. Also get some feedback on the flow of the statements and anything else that they can give you some good advice on so that you do a second draft and a third draft, and by the time you get ready for the deadline, this is a really strong application. On the interview day, you'll be given a variety of tasks to complete. So let's have a look at what these might be and what the head teacher is looking for when you are doing these tasks. Teaching a lesson is very, very common, so make sure you're prepared to do that. But it might only be for 20 or 30 minutes. In such a short time period, you need to show that you can engage with their students. And make sure you cover a crisp 3-part lesson with an introduction, a middle and some kind of plenary. Get lots of dialogue going and make sure you take lots of feedback from the students. For leadership positions, you are probably going to get some kind of data analysis task. So be prepared to do this. They'll want to know if you can interpret data to identify groups of students that are performing well, and groups of students that are underachieving and therefore they'll need some kind of intervention. If you're applying for a head of year position or an SLT position, you might get asked to give an assembly, and they want to see how confident you are in front of a large group of students. Can you hold their attention? Can you motivate them? Can you engage with them? Safeguarding will come up at some point during the selection process, so make sure you know all of the relevant regulations, and they might ask you to give some examples of safeguarding issues that you've come across, so be prepared to do that. Staff panels and student panels are very common these days. A staff panel is interested in how you are going to work with the staff. How will you engage with them? How will you hold them accountable? How will you support them? What will you do if staff are not performing so well? And a student panel is more interested in how will you get on with students? Will you be able to nurture them? Will you be able to help them get really good exam results? What will you do to support them if they're struggling? For leadership positions, you're likely to get some kind of in-tray exercise. And this is an exercise in prioritising maybe 15-20 tasks. So practice that, and you're likely to get asked what rationale you used to decide how to prioritise them. You might be asked to observe a lesson and give feedback. They want to know, can you identify what a good lesson is and what the aspects of that are? And can you give constructive feedback that will help a teacher to develop? And although they won't tell you this, when they give you some free time, they'll expect you to use it very productively. So plan how to use the free time they give you. You might want to visit the library and look at the resources. You might want to explore what IT resources they've got. You might want to visit the department you're going to be working in and look at the classroom layout, look at the resources, have a chat to the head of department or to other people there. But make sure you do this, because this will be fed back to the head teacher at some point. Performing well at these interview tasks is going to be a key factor in whether the school decides to offer you the job or not. Now, you need to practice doing these tasks well in advance of going for the interview. Because they'll only give you 3 to 4 days to prepare, it's highly unlikely you can do this in the time scale between being invited to interview and the interview day. So you've got to practice these tasks well in advance, and you've got to practice them several times so that you get better and better at them. Use a senior leader as someone who you can get involved in maybe a role play and get some feedback from them so that you know how to improve. And by doing this, you'll get better at these tasks and you'll build your confidence. So when you turn up on that interview day and they ask you to do task A, B, C and D, you're not going to feel anxious, you're not going to feel under pressure, because you've done these tasks plenty of times and you know what you need to do to be successful. Usually the last part of the selection process is a formal interview. And the panel for this will consist of the head teacher, some members of SLT, possibly somebody from HR, and probably a governor. The panel members have a common set of questions which they're going to ask to each candidate. But they will have read your CV and your application form, and they might decide to direct something specifically at aspects of this. So make sure you read both of these documents again before you go in for this panel interview, so that if they do ask you anything, it's not a surprise. You can relate to what's in those documents and you'll be able to give a suitable response very quickly. Now, it amazes me, but it happens all the time. Candidates don't answer the question we ask, and they go off at a complete tangent. And therefore, when we come to mark or grade that particular question, they don't score very highly. So if you're not sure exactly what they want from that question, ask them to clarify it. The best way, I think, to give your responses to these type of questions is to be concise, don't ramble on, make a very, very clear point, support that point with your thinking and the rationale that's behind it, and if you can, give an example from your own practice to illustrate this point. At the end of the panel interview, the head teacher will ask you if you've got any questions for the panel. Now, I think it's really important that you do, because as a head, I would expect you to have thought very deeply about this position so that you can decide if it's the right job for you. And inevitably, to do this, you should still have some questions where you'll need to find out some more information. So prepare these in advance and even get out a list of questions which show that you've done all of this preparation. That will come across really well to the panel and really well to the head. So you've completed all of these selection tasks, you're pretty exhausted by now. How do they go about making a decision on who to offer the job to? The first thing they'll do, or the first thing the head teacher will do, is ask the panel if there's anybody they feel they should rule out straight away. And this will happen if someone's performed extremely badly at one of the tasks. So therefore it's really important that you perform well at all of the tasks. After that, they'll aggregate the scores for all of the tasks and the questions in the panel interview, and they'll come to a total aggregate score. Any candidate who scores particularly low compared to the rest of the candidates will be ruled out at this stage. So it's really important you perform well at all of the tasks and you perform well at the interview questions, because all of this is going to get aggregated together. So by now, they've narrowed down the candidates to a smaller group, and they'll have many discussions to try and decide which candidate they think will fit in best with the school, will engage best with their students, and which one they think SLT will be able to work best with. If you are going to be very effective at each of the 5 steps, then you're going to need a mentor to guide and support you and give you really important feedback that's going to help you develop and improve. Someone who understands how to build a CV and knows exactly what a head teacher is looking for in the application form. Someone who can help you construct the application form and make sure that you meet all of the essential criteria and meet as many of the desirable criteria as you can, and therefore make sure you get invited to interview. Someone who can help you with the tasks, help you practice them, give you some really good feedback so that you become more confident and more skilled at each of these tasks. So if you've got somebody in your school, or you've got somebody that you know that can help you, they're going to be absolutely invaluable to make sure you put each of these steps into action really effectively. For those of you who might not be able to access mentors with the expertise or the time to spend guiding you through the entire job hunting process, then I would be delighted to be able to give you some extra help and support. So click the link below and book a call with me. This is a completely free 45-minute discussion. We'll have a chat about your current situation, what you need to do to progress in your career, and I'll give you some extra help and support and some more great tips on how you can get started with implementing the 5-step process that's going to get you those job offers.